let's think about the art. Let's think about the relationship of the artist to society and the place where art comes into that in the middle, because that's the product, that's the method of communication, and that's where the value lies. But in order to consider the relationship of the artwork to society, we need to have a way of determining its value. There are numerous models and processes available, ranging from I like what I like to intellectual models that are extremely detailed, accounting for every single aspect of a particular work. The model we're going to consider today is a phenomenological model, where we consider the phenomena, the things that we can observe and quantify and measure in some ways, and we will use this as the basis of our work. And there's some advantages to this. The main one is by making solid, contextual, and informed aesthetic judgments concerning the arts. This helps us to understand the sometimes complex relationship between an artist and society. We need to make solid, contextual, informed judgments. How do we do this? So to avoid problems in evaluation, we're going to use a systematic method based on, well, there are a lot of problems anytime someone begins to evaluate artwork, depending on their perspective and their knowledge and their experience in doing so. But here is a list of some problems that emerge in evaluation. The main problem is that haste, going too fast, will often yield weak and unsupported aesthetic judgments. In other words, if you don't spend enough time with the artwork, you don't know it well enough to be able to say yes or no to that particular composition or that dance or that film. Systematic methods are not always employed. Important aspects can be overlooked. An evaluation model does not have to be completely systematic, but the benefit of systematic methods is that it will account for all the elements and principles within an artwork, hopefully. And that will again help us to not make a hasty, unsupported aesthetic judgment. Sometimes judgments are based not on the work itself, but on external factors. Political factors, pressure, commentary, things that may have nothing to do with that artwork itself. And the other thing is that judgments can be subjective, and that reduces the opportunity to learn from the artwork and to engage the community and enter into a dialogue with other people, and eliminates our possibility for growth or study by interacting with the work. I know what I know does have some currency and some credibility. I know what I like has that too. The difficulty is when you combine those ideas, I know what I know and I know what I like, you can limit your focus and your view, and it creates a very limited perspective on a particular work of art. It was begun by a man named Edmund Feldman, an art educator and art historian, and Jean Mittler, who was also an art educator and art historian. And these two men did not collaborate directly on the model, but Edmund Feldman laid the groundwork for it, and Jean Mittler was able to add some appropriate means of adjusting it to make it more useful and to prevent errors of aesthetic judgment. But it's a four-step system. It's a thoughtful system. It involves description, analysis, interpretation, and judgment. So description. The description is a detailed cataloging of everything that's seen in the artwork. That can be the elements of art, the principles of art, the visual content, in other words, who's there, what's there, and any kind of other items in the artwork itself that have the potential to be significant for the work. This is the first point of phenomenology, and this is perhaps the most important, because once a significant and detailed cataloging is made, it allows the person who's making a judgment to see things and see relationships and to come to ideas that they would not have come to before had they not spent the sufficient time required to do this. The second step is analysis, and that's deciding how the principles of art are employed in the artwork, how it's organized, and this leads it to a descriptive stage. In art, there are elements and principles. Elements are the building blocks. Principles are the way the building blocks are used. So in this analysis stage, there are some very interesting things that can happen. For one thing, there can be leading and receding aspects of the artwork that can be noted. It's not all going to be equal and equidistant in all directions. It is going to be a matter of there are some features that are prominent and some features that are not prominent. And when you note that, you begin to understand aspects of artistic style and historic context as well, because these are characteristics that were important to the artist. The third step is interpretation, and this is where you identify the message or the purpose of communication in the artwork. And this is the stage where you bring in the historic information or the cultural context. In the context of the artwork can be discussed, and this is the point where that information is most valuable, not in the first or second stages, but in this third stage, the interpretation stage. By keeping this separate to this point, it does allow a person to observe all the important characteristics that help to define the work as a specific work of art. And the fourth step is judgment. And this is where you make a decision on how effective the artwork is. Is it a good artwork? And this is the step that Jean Mittler worked with in very specific ways by taking and placing the artwork into one of three major theories of art: imitationalism, formalism, and emotionalism. And what happens is that an artwork will display characteristics of one of these three major theories, and then you can place it into this category and determine, is it a good work or not work, by how well it fulfills the characteristics. It is possible that you can have an artwork that have characteristics in more than one category. However, a work ultimately will be grounded in one category above another. Here are the three general theories of art. Imitationalism. In this case, the most important thing is how accurate the work is in describing the subject matter. It's successful if it reminds us of what we see or hear in the world around us. So in other words, how realistic is it? Formalism. The most important thing is the level of organization of the elements and principles. In other words, the nuts and the bolts and the chemistry, the mathematics of it, the physics of it. How well does it go together in this particular way? How organized is it? Is this the most important thing about the artwork? That's formalism. The third one is emotionalism. And the most important thing in emotionalism is the vivid communication of moods, feelings, and ideas to the viewer. Not the lukewarm communication, but the vivid communication of moods, feelings, and ideas to the viewer. So imitationalism, how realistic is it? Formalism, how technically organized and beautiful it is from that kind of perspective. The third, emotionalism, does it reach into our soul and our heart and our guts, and does it touch us in this very personal way? So now let's consider three artworks. We're going to apply this four-step process to each of them, and we're going to make an aesthetic judgment based on how well the work fulfills the category for one of the three theories of art. And again, just as a review, we are going to place these works in one of three theories. The imitationalism, which is the literal aspects, the formalism, which are the structural aspects, and the emotionalism, which is the expressive aspects. What drives this artwork? We're going to be considering this artwork as it is, without titles, without any information concerning the artist. We'll get to that in a moment. But we'll start by confronting the artwork itself. Here we have a work that is very geometric in nature. It's very rhythmic. It's also very colorful. You'll notice that there are objects being placed against the background, and there's a full range of color or a full range of palette that is appears to be floating in front of it. These objects have shapes. They are geometric, however, they are not hard edge. They're a little softer. They're a little bit more organic. They seem to move between the big objects. As we look more closely, we begin seeing relationships between colors and the lines and the shapes that are there, the textures. It has a sort of a flat look to it. In other words, it's not a very photographically realistic kind of work. It looks more symbolic or more iconic. Take a look on the left side and the right side. There seems to be a balance in the middle, and the object on the left seems to balance the object on the right. There's also particular shapes that fan out, shapes that are squared off, shapes that look like they are holding something, perhaps. Are those two hands? Is that a red hand and a yellow hand on the object on the left? What about on the right side? What do we see there? We see small caricatures of people, maybe, standing in a building. This is what some people interpret. It is an interesting work. It's very rhythmic. It's very jazzy. As far as the context of this particular work, we begin to understand that it has the look of a particular part of history. It looks like the early 20th century. We have a distance to this work, however. As fun and as party-like as it is, it doesn't connect with us too deeply. It really is falling very squarely in the category of formalism. This particular work was created by Vasily Kandinsky in 1939. He called it Composition X. Why did he call it Composition X? Maybe to emphasize its formal structures and also to force you as the audience member, as the viewer, to come up with your own interpretation of it. This particular work does have a feeling of a party. It almost looks like two musicians or two people dancing. Those are all valid and worthwhile interpretations. And it is a formal work. It doesn't look like a photograph. It's not communicating on an emotional level especially vividly, but it is highly organized. There are a lot of structural relationships between different parts of it, and the visual aspects of it are what driving it. It is formal. We may say it's a very well executed work because it is fulfilling that formalistic condition quite well in this particular way. There's nothing in there that's blurring or distorting or confusing us in any way. So again, we would be able to say that this Composition X is a good artwork from a formalist standpoint. This next artwork is a rather unusual artwork. It's rather playful. It's a little surprising. In fact, look at the look of surprise on that boy's face. He's seeing something that we can't see in the picture, but it's not what he expected by any way, shape, or form. This particular work is also unusual because he's stepping out of a picture frame. Now, how many times in life do you know people can step through a picture frame? We can step through windows, we can step through doors, but out of a picture frame? That's odd. The picture frame is a gold frame. It's gold leaf or gold paint has been applied to it. It's very sharp, very rectangular, very squared off. It creates a very interesting contrast between the shapes of the boy's body and clothing. Also, notice the contrasts of highlights. The light coming from the boy's right, our left, shining down on him, in contrast to the dark shadows and deep spaces that emerge back on the other side of the picture frame, on the lower left and the upper right especially. His clothing is coming from the 18th century. He's not very wealthy. He's more of a peasant boy. He's he is as he is. He's not wearing any shoes. And in fact, if you look very carefully at his feet, you'll notice very tiny bits of dirt underneath his toenails. He is as he is. Interestingly enough, this portrait of this young boy is very realistic. The situation is totally fantastic and fantasy-driven, but the portrait itself is highly realistic, highly imitational. If this were a portrait of a young boy in the 18th century, this looks like it. It looks almost photographically real. In fact, this particular painting belongs to a style of painting known as trompe-l'œil, which is French for to fool the eye. So we begin to believe that something is truly there. So much the effect and to the status that we forget that he's stepping through a picture frame, going from one reality into another. Notice the immense contrast that we see in this particular work. The very dark recesses of the other room, or the reality inside the painting, versus the highlights on his body, his clothing, the shine off of his forehead, the shine off of his fingernails and toenails. Contrast is driving this painting immensely. We don't know what he sees, but it's something that is completely startling to him. And again, our interpretation of what's going on could vary. But this is a work that really challenges us because it fits so much in the area of creating something realistic and imitational. It would fit perfectly in the realm of imitationalism. The only thing is, we know it's a fantasy because he's stepping through a picture frame. So this kind of creates a little bit of a dissonance for us. Do we value the aspects of imitationalism, or do we value the aspects of emotionalism? We definitely have some type of strong emotion that we share as an experience in common with this young boy. It's a little frightening. If we had to place it into an aesthetic category, you could make an argument for either way. But because of the fact that we have to look at it from a point of reality, it can't be imitationalism. It's going to have to be emotionalism and bring in that element of personal fantasy. So this particular painting was painted in 1874 by Perebrel del Caso, and it's called Escaping Criticism. So what is the criticism the boy is escaping from? We don't know. But it's serious enough that he's willing to leave the reality he's in to try to move into a new realm. This third artwork we're going to consider is a very strong artwork. It's a very striking artwork. It's a drawing which appears to be in charcoal and pencil on a piece of paper. It is two people embracing one another. One's head is tilted back, the other one, the face is buried in the chest of the other. It's a very strong emotional work. The artist has used line in order to create this sense of emotion and also contrast. Notice that there's no clothing on the particular, either of the particular people, and because there is no clothing, there's a nakedness and an elemental, raw emotional quality to this particular work. You'll notice the dark contrasts and the highlights. You'll notice the way the lines are formed and shaped. You'll also notice that the palette, the color, is extremely limited. This helps to focus our emotions in particular ways concerning this work. When we take a look at this work, we feel the pain of the person that's holding the other person. This particular work is a drawing by Katha Kollwitz called Woman with a Dead Child. She created it in 1903. And the particular perspective that we would look through is the one of emotionalism, the vivid communication of moods, feelings, ideas, this very profound sadness that this woman holding the dead child is experiencing. All these things go together with the line, with the reduction of color, with bringing it into something that's very focused and very terse. She is able to use these elements and principles of art to create this focus and this emotional communication very strongly. So we have looked at three particular categories of work. We've looked at the phenomena. We've considered the artwork itself. We've made a catalog of some of the elements and principles. We've placed it into historic context. We've created an interpretation. And then we've also created a judgment about how well the work fulfills these particular characteristics. So again, this is a phenomenological model, and it's one that's very effective in working